Faced with the worsening situation, the United States Military Command adopted an emergency measure, immediately deploying an additional 3,000 Marines to the border region in the Middle East. The order allowed no delay. It was an immediate mobilization. They are executing a clear and objective strategy to neutralize, eliminate, and disable all significant military capabilities of the enemy. All available means of transport were activated without hesitation. At military bases scattered throughout the country, the Marines were already positioned and ready, waiting beside their designated V-22 Osprey aircraft on the flight line. They wore full combat gear, body-hugging ballistic vests, securely fastened helmets, rifles in hand, and backpacks loaded with essential supplies for a prolonged operation. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. The moment the order was given, boarding began without delay. The rear ramps of the Ospreys lowered simultaneously, and the Marines advanced in disciplined sequence. Each man took his seat, fastened his belt, and made one last quick check of his equipment. In a few moments, the ramps closed, the rotors began to spin with increasing force, and the aircraft took off, leaving the ground for the open sea. The initial target was not direct combat, but military ships already strategically positioned in the region. These vessels served as transfer and preparation platforms, where another contingent of Marines was already embarked and organizing for the next stages of the mission. On board, the pace was equally intense. Officers conducted quick and objective briefings in the compartments below deck. Emergency procedures, rules of engagement, and contingency plans were reviewed. Nothing was wasted. Every instruction was direct, essential, and immediately absorbed by the troops. Once the briefing was over, the Marines moved to their positions and began the final preparations. Magazines were removed from ammunition boxes and loaded one projectile at a time in a repetitive and precise motion. The rifles underwent meticulous functional checks. Secondary weapons were loaded and securely placed in their holsters. Extra magazines were distributed and organized in the vest pockets. The machine gun crews efficiently assembled their systems, securing them on bipods and conducting full cycle tests to ensure everything operated flawlessly. In every corner of the ship, the same scene repeated itself. Men focused, checking equipment, loading ammunition, or receiving final instructions. The preparation never stopped. Every Marine on board was engaged in some task, adjusting details, anticipating failures, ensuring total readiness. And while this military machine operated at a high level at sea, the first groups were already reaching their landing points on land in the Middle East, marking the beginning of a new phase of the operation. The Ospreys landed, the ramps were lowered, and the Marines disembarked with their equipment. Their mission was to establish a temporary camp that would serve as a staging base for all the units that would arrive later. They needed to build everything from scratch. The soldiers unloaded their backpacks and supply boxes from the aircraft. Camouflage nets were the first to be installed, stretched over posts and stakes to break up the visual profile of the camp as seen from the air. Next came the upper shelters. Tarpaulins mounted on metal structures to provide shade and protection from the weather. Then, the excavation began. Teams began constructing defensive positions around the perimeter. Combat shelters, observation posts, protected positions for vehicles. Sandbags were filled and stacked. The firing ranges were quickly cleared and organized. Communication antennas were erected at strategic points, and contact with command was flawlessly re-established. Within hours, what had previously been just an open desert began to transform into a fully functional forward operating camp. Covered positions were set up, improvised defensive structures took shape, and a direct link with the fleet was established, ensuring constant coordination between land and sea. On the upper decks of the ships, the pace was no less intense. Marines conducted live fire exercises with precision and discipline. Targets were positioned at the stern, and the shooters took turns firing in continuous sequences. Between series, they adjusted their optics, zeroed their sights, and calibrated each weapon according to the distances expected in the combat area. Nothing was left to chance. The training proceeded in a constant rotation. While one group was engaged in firing, another quickly and accurately loaded magazines, and a third performed the cleaning and maintenance of the weapons. Each movement was part of a continuous system where preparation and execution happened simultaneously. Meanwhile, at military bases responsible for heavy logistics, activity reached peak levels. Forklifts and cargo vehicles moved non-stop along the runways, transporting equipment and supplies in an uninterrupted flow. Armored vehicles were carefully driven onto the ramps of C-17 transport aircraft, where they were positioned and secured to the ground with high-strength chains, ensuring stability during flight. Behind them, pallets of ammunition were being meticulously loaded. Boxes of rifle cartridges, mortar shells, grenades, and anti-tank missiles were arranged in sequence, forming a complete logistical chain. Along with this, essential supplies were also being loaded: food, water, medical equipment, spare parts, fuel tanks, and portable generators. Everything needed to sustain continuous field operations was being prepared. The C-17 aircraft were pushed to their operational limits, loaded one after another in a continuous flow without any pause. As soon as each load was carefully positioned, securely fastened, and subjected to final checks, the aircraft immediately began taxiing down the runway and took off towards the Middle East. There were no breaks. On the ground, others were already waiting in line, ready to take their place in sequence, keeping the cycle in constant motion. It was a precise operation, synchronized like a cog in a machine that could not fail. The supply chain operated seamlessly, connecting bases, aircraft, and operating zones in a single integrated system. Each step was executed with absolute precision, ensuring that nothing was lost in the process. Time was a critical factor, and every minute was used to its fullest potential. Nothing was left to chance. Every detail was anticipated, every need calculated in advance. From the exact amount of ammunition to the medical supplies and fuel needed to sustain days of continuous operation, everything was planned and sent with precision. When the Marines finally arrived at the field of operations, they would not find an improvised scenario, but rather an already established and ready-to-use structure. Ammunition organized, vehicles positioned, supplies distributed, and support guaranteed. Everything would be in place, waiting for them, allowing them to go into action immediately, without delay, with full combat capability from the very first moment. Thanks for watching. See you next time.